ready, for you are still fleshly. For as long as there is jealousy and quarreling among you, are you not fleshly and behaving according to human inclinations? For when one says, I belong to Paul, and another, I belong to Apollos, are you not all too human? What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and each will receive wages according to their own labor. For we are God's co-workers, working together. You are God's field, God's building. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. And so I have entitled the scripture Reflection, Spiritual Maturity, and the Seeds of Leadership. Learning a new skill can be a quite difficult and lengthy endeavor, like feeding yourself as a toddler, learning to walk, riding a bike, learning a new language, trying a new recipe, driving for the first time. When learning something new, there are often several steps to follow until we feel completely comfortable. During those beginning stages, we practice a lot, we repeat steps over and over, and we may make a lot of mistakes. We may stumble or fall. And at other times, we might dive right in with excitement and curiosity. We may move slowly, like hesitant and unsure of ourselves. We may look around a lot for validation. Am I doing this correctly? Is this the right way? We often need step-by-step instructions when we are at the beginning stages of something. We may even cling tightly to our teachers while we are finding our way. In this stage, we care a lot about what others think. And don't get me wrong, this stage is very essential to growth. In this learning stage, it would be cruel to judge someone who is just starting out. For example, it's not really socially acceptable to lose patience with a baby who is just learning how to communicate, just learning how to eat solid food. In the same way, there are ways that you can put signs on your car to indicate to folks that you are a new driver, and hopefully they'll be a little bit more understanding with you. Eventually, though, there comes a point in learning where a switch turns on, and we begin to trust ourselves and our own experiences. We realize that we do not necessarily have to look over our shoulder, and we do not necessarily need a teacher showing us the way. Instead, we slowly begin to trust our own wisdom, our own strength, our own experiences, our own stories, even our own bodies, to do what it has been trained to do. And we begin to see ourselves as equally capable and equally knowledgeable as those who have taught us. And I think the same is true of spiritual growth. In this letter, Paul writes to the church in Corinth about spiritual maturity. In those early days of the church, there were deep misunderstandings about leadership and about structure. Though Paul addresses them as Christians, he is frustrated by their childlike behavior. Though at one point in the early church, like when Christ had first resurrected, there was authentic and earnest desire to understand God and to participate in the Jesus movement, a movement that was characterized by love and justice and radical hospitality. But somewhere along the way, there had grown jealousy and strife and division among them. The people had even allowed themselves to form cliques as various competing groups latched their allegiance onto their favorite preacher or their favorite teacher, like Paul, Peter, or Apollos. And this is exactly what was happening with different schools of Greek philosophy at the time. Each philosopher would gather their own following and set themselves against all others. And this was supposed to be the beloved community, the Jesus movement, a community that is different, a community that is set apart, a community committed to the good news. But unfortunately, they started to fall into the same patterns as the society around them, where they weren't loyal to God necessarily, but to their human leaders, and they were labeled then as baby believers due to their lack of development in the faith, even after a decent amount of time had passed and Paul left them. And so as a result, Paul's writing attempted to flatten the hierarchies that had come to pass, that the Corinthians used to turn against one another. Paul's instruction was fairly simple: to not put our leaders on pedestals. Of course, we should always respect and honor the people that God has placed in our path. But Paul really wanted people to understand that spiritual leaders are merely humans fulfilling a particular role that God has placed in their life. Putting people on pedestals harms us, and it harms them as well. It can make us devalue their humanity, making them the sole source of our joy, or even the sole source of our disappointment. Although leaders may have particular knowledge or skills, they are not more valuable, more knowledgeable, or more important than another. As my friend Casey wrote, Paul wants to identify himself and the other apostles with the everyday, hardworking person. He's just a person working in the same field as they are, building up the same church that they are. And so he uses this agricultural metaphor. Paul is the planter, and Apollos is the one who waters. Paul says that he planted, meaning that he planted the seed, which was the beginning of their faith. It was through Paul's preaching in the synagogue and among the Gentiles that the first believers were converted. And then he moved on to another project, and Apollos came along and watered what Paul had planted. And according to the book of Acts, Apollos was a gifted and powerful preacher who refuted the Jews and greatly helped those who had believed at one point. Their ministries and styles of ministry were quite different. Paul was fairly simple and was the one who got things started. But Apollos was more eloquent and caused many of the believers to continue to grow in deeper ways. But they both worked for the same common goal. And when the crop flourishes, finally, it flourishes because that was God's doing all along. And in fact, Paul argues that every believer has a role in creating a harvest. But we all have different tasks and different gifts in line with our abilities and calling. But all are necessary, and no one can do it alone. Unfortunately, though, many of us have been trained to devalue our own role and contribution to the work of Christ. And if we are not actively working against this temptation, we can easily see leaders as little Christ and ourselves merely as spectators. The church can become like a show that we come to observe, and leaders are the ones who hold all the wisdom and responsibility. It's actually one of the easiest ways to grow a big social media following or a mega church of thousands, by relying on the one charismatic leader who is attractive and dynamic and high energy and persuasive, to build a structure that is a top-down approach where the leader is the sole person who casts the vision and starts every project and tells everyone else what to do. It's good to find leaders that we believe in, that inspire us, that proclaim messages that are theologically sound and inclusive. But if we aren't careful, it can be easy to sit back and watch, to wait to be told what to do and how to move. And when things aren't quite the way we want them to be, we can quickly fall into resentment because of our expectations. And I was thinking about this week, and one of the things I wondered about is I wonder if one of the reasons for this kind of dynamic, especially in the American modern church, is that pastors are typically described as shepherds of a flock. Like, that's one of the most common metaphors for what a pastor is supposed to be. And I can understand why this is a common metaphor. Like, shepherds are seen as people who care for and provide for and sacrifice for and act as an example for sheep to follow. And so at the most basic level, I can understand how the image can create feelings of comfort and belonging, as people know that there is someone who knows and cares for them, someone who is on their team and wants the very best for them. So in that sense, the shepherd can be a loving image of a leader called to a particular group of people. But like most metaphors, it does break down at some point. Like, I wonder if there is also a dark side to the shepherd model. Because traditionally, when you think about sheep, they are not very resourceful creatures. By their very nature, sheep have very small brains. They are pretty clueless. They wander. They are easily distracted. They get lost. They are without direction. They need the shepherd to go in any way that makes sense. They do not know their right hand from their left. They need the guidance of the shepherd to do anything. And so in that way, I think the metaphor breaks down, right? Like, to assert that the sheep need a shepherd, it can sometimes assume that folks by themselves are incompetent, incapable, or powerless on their own, lacking the capacity to educate or protect themselves, to trust their own wisdom. Because according to Paul, there is no single person who is higher than another, no gift or talent that is more important than another, no one person that is responsible for what the church is and will be. And he invites his readers to see the work of the church as a collaborative effort by all those who are baptized and called by God. For Paul, laboring in the church is a group project, and the Spirit is the one who makes it all fall into place. This is why in the Presbyterian Church, we refer to Christians as the priesthood of all believers. This language was an attempt to correct an older view of the church, which placed papal authority above and against everyone else. As priesthood of all believers, all are called and all are gifted. Believers are seen as co-laborers working towards a common goal. If we think about it this way, a good spiritual leader then is not someone who lords power over or tells everyone else how to fall in line, but a good leader is someone who helps others discover their own potential, one who empowers and develops the leadership skills of others, someone who teaches people to look within, to trust themselves. True leaders are people who inspire small flames that can later turn into larger fires. A gifted leader understands that while they may be called to plant a seed, someone else may be called later to water it. And sometimes they do not always live to see the full impact of what they do. And so, since it is also Black History Month, I wanted to give an example of this from the civil rights movement. So last month, we had the opportunity to reflect on the life and legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And obviously, while Dr. King absolutely deserves to be honored every year, it is also important to recognize less popular leaders like Ella Baker, who was a Black woman at the time. And she worked hand in hand alongside MLK, and she had a hand in building many of the most important organizations of the civil rights movement. She defied gender roles at the time and elevated the often unseen work of women to advance efforts for change. And according to one site, They said that Ella Baker, for us, highlights a different leadership style. While Martin Luther King is remembered as a powerful preacher and a rousing orator, Ella Baker calls attention to the role of a grassroots organizer, someone who works more behind the scenes. And though they worked together, Ella Baker was actually very critical of Dr. King. She often spoke against his charismatic, top-down leadership style, and so their relationship was often full of tension. Her approach to leadership was to focus on developing people's leadership locally for the long term, not just swooping in and telling them what to think or giving a beautiful speech and then leaving, but actually staying for the long haul, investing in the community, working behind the scenes. There are many quotes of hers where she says she doesn't want to be seen on the big screen or to be the face of a movement. She didn't want to be put on a pedestal or become another messianic figure. She once said that oppressed people, whatever their level of formal education, have the ability to understand and interpret the world around them, to see the world for what it is and move to transform it. So she often worked to build deep and lasting relationships with people. She spent time building trust, listening, and letting people know that what they need is already inside of them. Her motto was power to the people. And she believed in empowering people to take charge of their own struggles for freedom. And most importantly, she wanted people to see themselves as just as brilliant as their leaders that they admired and to believe in their own gifts and talents. She taught people that what you see on the big screen, when you see this man who is telling you all these things and you admire it, it's actually in you too. And so she helped develop that. And now, with the resurgence of civil rights, with the Black Lives Matter movement, I have heard many people around me saying things like, we really need another MLK. We really need another figure like that. And folks have said this really out of desperation and heartbreak, because even though so much has changed, so much is also still the same. Since so much is still unjust, folks have wondered, like, maybe we do need another prominent voice that we can all get behind so that we can all get on the same page. But after learning about Ella Baker, I don't think what we need is another singular leader to show us what to do next. Whether in the church or in the wider society, I think what Paul is trying to teach is the same thing that Ella Baker was trying to teach, which is a concept that is core to the New Testament. We, not a single pastor or a single movement leader or a single church, we are all the body of Christ. We are made up of many parts. Each part of the body has a role to play. Whether it is an eye or an ear or a leg, it has something to offer. And so the future of Christianity and the future even of this church is not up to one person. There may be several leaders that come through the same church who all have different personalities and contribute different things, an insight here, a strategy there, a program at another point, but the church belongs to all of us. We are called to see one another as human, to see one another as working hand in hand, which is to say that if there's something you want to change or something you want to build, let's plan those things together. If there's a cause you care about, how can we help you get connected to the right people? If there's people you feel like aren't here that should be, how can we partner together in that effort? If there's something you feel needs to be acknowledged, start that thing. Each one of us is a teacher, and every person an expert on something. So friends, let us use our gifts for God's glory, for the building up of Christ Church, for the liberation of our most marginalized, and for the good of our wider community. Let us co-labor together. Amen. And now is your opportunity to share with all of us what is bubbling up inside and how this message is moving in you.
Thank you for that, and especially about talking about Ella Baker. That's very interesting. I want to kind of like learn about her a little bit more because I don't know anything about her. The when you were reading the verses, the thing that was coming to me very quickly was just how ironic and unfortunate. I mean, it sounds so clear in what he's saying is all of the denominations of churches get hung up at times on maybe not maybe not all the time, but being the right one.
Yeah.
This is the we're I can remember my mom would be, um, if like when I was in college and I was going to a on campus church thing. Oh, you're going to a Methodist church. I mean, like it
Yeah.
was kind of like somehow if you weren't sticking with
Yeah.
the one, and I always like looked at her like I just don't get. I mean, and again, her dad was a Lutheran minister, so she was loyal
Yeah.
to the tribe, but
Yeah.
I always just was so perplexed by that, and she'd be like, "But yes, we're all Christians, but and then there would be a qualification of something, and I was blown. I just was like, I don't get that, and I should have, if I had known that verse, I would have thrown it right at her and been like, look, I mean, we're all
Yeah.
on the same page. We really are. And distinctly still. I mean, Catholic and the difference of.
And set ourselves up against different denominations and different churches and all of that that I think continues to be um, a huge problem. Like when you hear of a particular denomination, there are often things that come to mind that aren't necessarily true, but ways that we've set ourselves against each other.
Then the other thing too, I remember we had a guest minister here. I don't know if you were here when she was here. It was a while ago, but she was talking very frankly about her sense of disillusionment might not have been the right word, but she was dealing with loss and depression and feeling very alone as a minister
Mm.
because do you guys do you remember that and how there was an expectation of the people in her congregation, and she felt like she would either be disappointing them or she couldn't talk to them or things like that, and I do think that can happen, and certainly I think in bigger churches where you don't get to know the person, you don't get to have these conversations. They get up there, they do their thing, people are like, oh, they're so wise, they're so all these different things, but they don't get to know that on Monday they have to go deal with something awful.
Yeah.
you know um, so that's unfortunate that happens. It happens, and I think it happens with doctors. I mean, there's people who are in positions of some sort of leadership.
Yeah.
It probably happens with CEOs. I mean, there's people that are expected as the leader of the group
Mm-hmm.
to just have it all together
Yeah.
and not be as human as we all are. So
I don't think I was here. Who was it?
It was a while ago.
Oh, okay.
She did step away from church for a while, I think. Your memory's better than mine. I remember it was my sister. And saying she had to leave, like she couldn't preach for a while because she didn't feel like she could be so authentic with it.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So like it was when I was working here. Okay. I was like,
Is it this time?
okay. All right. Yeah. No, I think that I think that that's another aspect of it that's really real is like what we have expectations we have of leaders, whether it's pastors or politicians or whoever. I mean, there's so many like sources of authority in society, and how our expectations of them can actually be really detrimental to them, especially if they are not taking care of themselves. It can be really easy to like take all of that in and feel like you do have to be superhuman. Um, and so, yeah, how do we all kind of like share some of that, you know, the load of, you know, what our church is and can be. It's real. Any others?
I don't know. I just feel like there's, when I think about the power being up and coming down instead of being risen, it's just the way we're treated. I mean, this is the way we're taught. We live in a world where there's parents that tell us what to do, then there's teachers that tell us what to do, and then we're out in the world and the politicians tell us what to do or what we should do. And so it's hard for um, people to think that they have any power sometimes in their life,
Mm,
you know, and more so for a lot of people than others. I mean, that's certainly not distributed evenly in this country, that's for sure.
yeah.
But it's a difficult process, I think, for people in their spiritual walk
Mm-hmm.
to uh, come to realize that Christ wants a relationship with each of us on His level.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So just know that it's possible. Know that it's possible to be loved entirely like someone loved Martin Luther King, that you yourself could be loved like that,
Yeah.
that you're worthy.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for that vulnerability, because it is hard and it is like so much of what our society teaches, and it can be really vulnerable and scary to think that we are worthy and powerful in our own ways. But thank you for admitting that, and I think I share that as well. It's a lot of unlearning, for sure.
I taught in the public school, and we, God forbid, couldn't talk about religion and spiritual things, but I taught first grade, and then I taught with the special needs kids, but I remember both levels. The very first day of school, I would go in and say, like, I'm your teacher, but you're also going to teach me.
Hmm.
And I'm going to help you grow, but you're also going to help me grow.
Yeah.
And I'm going to learn to love you, and hopefully you're going to learn to love me. But when I said I'm going to teach you and you're going to learn to love, to teach me, they're like, I don't know, you're a lot older than we are. But as the year went on, it was and as we got to do certain lessons, and I would say, see, you taught me something, and they'd look like, what? Like, you're the teacher, but it was, what comes around goes around. And I would say to them, like, see, you just taught me something. And they would be like, I can't wait to go home and tell my mother I taught the teacher something.
Yeah.
But it was to try to teach them that it goes both ways, no matter what the age, but they got such a kick out of it, and I said, you could teach the student, your friend sitting next to you something. You can teach anybody anything. And I think it's important for them to learn that at a very young age. or whether they have a disability or not,
Yeah.
that they can teach somebody something, you know? So I tried to ingrain that, you know, from the time I started teaching. And I hope they learned something from that, because I certainly learned a lot from them too. So.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's beautiful. And that's a perfect example. Actually, I was thinking about you and wondering if you had that experience as a teacher, because I think it's a similar, like, we don't think that we have things to teach our teachers. And I was wondering if you were going to share about that. But yeah, I think it's real. And I can say, like, I've been here for, I don't know, a little over a year and a half. And I can say that, like, I have that experience all the time. Like, I love the discussion. I love getting to talk to people one on one. Like, I learn so much from people. I learn, like, what's important to them and what has hurt them and how they prefer to think about theology and what resonates with them. And it transforms me. And I hope that people just know that, like, it does go both ways, and that your stories are just as important as mine or a Bible story or whatever. Like, it all is just does a work on me. And you'd be surprised, like, when pastors get together, like, we're always talking about things that, like, our congregations teach us. And I don't think that they know that we do that, but it's always like, somebody said this and I'd never thought about it that way, or somebody, like, told me that this is how something sounded and I never knew. So yeah, just hoping that that can feel empowering, that it really is both ways. Yeah. Jasmine.
So ironically, last night we had a game night. My brother and my brother-in-law were at the house, so obviously I get to hang out with the boys. So we're talking about sports.
Yeah.
So the Warriors were playing the Lakers last night, and we were having a conversation about how Curry and LeBron were great basketball players, and I was like, well, you're kind of comparing apples to oranges, because we're talking about two different positions and this and that. And as we're having the conversation, I'm thinking, there's 5 people on a basketball court at a time per team, so everybody has to play their role in order for them to succeed. So it's just ironic that we were having that conversation last night, and now today we're talking about how everybody has their role, but not anybody is more important than anyone else, but everybody has to play their part in order for success.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it's really awesome that we got to have that conversation last night, and then he gets to hear it again today.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Reinforcement. Same spirit in all these different conversations, just reminding us of what we need to be remembered. But yeah. Any others? Okay. All right. Well, if there aren't any other thoughts, thank you so much for engaging that discussion. And sometimes Paul can be a little controversial, so I'm glad that he seems a little less scary today. It can be hard to swallow.